Hello, my name is Miguel García-Garibay. I'm the Senior Dean of the College and the Dean of the Division of Physical Sciences. And I'm really pleased to see all of you here today to learn more about the California Wildfire Institute and the California Wildfire Institute at UCLA. So I think we're going to start with a quick video, and then I will come back. If we look at the highest priorities that we could have as a society, the environment should be number one.
California is facing really catastrophic effects on our environment. We've seen temperatures increasing and wildfires increasing steadily each year.
Every year we have these mega fires, and every year we spend $20 billion to try to manage it. At the same time, we are spending almost nothing producing solutions.
The situation is urgent. Ideally, we should have been acting already, but we can't go back in time. What we have is now.
California has enormous intellectual resources at its universities, a very willing and committed population to solve a problem. But what it really needs is a comprehensive institute that can bring together both the best science with individuals and expertise that can actually affect change in the state.
We need an authoritative voice around the solutions that are backed up by science, that can be used effectively by the policy community and by the private sector. And that's fundamentally what the Climate Wildfire Institute was created to do.
CWI at UCLA is going to be a research institute focused on climate and wildfire to understand, predict, train students, inform policy, and develop resilience.
We're in the second largest city in the United States, very diverse city, very diverse economically, and we know that the lowest income folks in our society often bear the largest costs of climate change. This gives us an opportunity to understand how we can deal with issues in an equitable way. We're a public institution. Serving California is part of our DNA. This is our mission, number one. Number two, we have the expertise.
At UCLA, we have the investment in the intellectual infrastructure that is going to be needed to address many of these issues. We are one of the institutions where climate prediction really was born, and we have organizations like the Institute of Environment and Sustainability.
The IOS has been in existence for 25 years, looking at problems from across the spectrum of science. UCLA has a long-standing record of fostering interdisciplinary research. We have a record of collaboration. We have a whole host of scholars and researchers who are already working on science that's related to climate and wildfire.
This is a unique opportunity to leverage UCLA's educational programs to train the next generation of leaders to transform our broken relationship with wildfire.
So if we look at what we have today and what we could have with a small graded investment, we could really do something transformative.
We appreciate state support, providing initial funding to get us started. But it's often that philanthropic support that really leads to dazzling results. And often it's the differentiator in a research effort.
We're not just doing research for the moment. We're doing research for the future.
We're at a critical point where we have to make changes, or you get to a point where you really can't recover. This is an urgent problem that requires immediate solutions. We can't wait.
Good, thank you very much. So I would invite you to take a look at that video. Obviously, it's very easy to find in YouTube if you want to take another look and share it with friends to gives you an idea of this, some of what we're trying to do here at UCLA. So, like I said before, let me just repeat that I'm very, very grateful that you're interested in this incredibly important subject, something that we've all seen. We'll see what it does, and it's just some of us are closer to the effects of wildfires and mega wildfires these days, and some see it at a distance, but we all live the effects of that. So this is something that we really understand much better. Now, the partnership between the California Wildfire Institute and UCLA is something that is unprecedented. We are here to learn some of the details of what that is. What is the California Wildfire Institute. And what is the California Wildfire Institute at UCLA, and how do they synergize, and how do they help us address the problems of wildfire prediction, prevention, remediation, and so many different aspects that are going to require so many different aspects of scholarly research and in the field work, especially the work that firefighters do to combat these fires. So this is an exceptional partnership, and we will see more about that. We are right now we are at the early stages of developing this initiative, but we have a really big vision, and we love it that you're here to help us accomplish that. It makes so much sense for us to start with something that we already know we're really good at, including complex data collection, sophisticated analysis, develop predictive models. And remember that we also attract some of the best minds in terms of faculty and students that are really good at addressing really tough challenges. So we plan to build on UCLA based on existing strengths in our environmental modeling and our culture of interdisciplinary research. We have the Institute for the Environment and Sustainability that is just an amazing organization. You'll learn more about that along the way, where we bring scholars of all disciplines to tackle specific challenges that have to do with environment, with sustainability, and with environmental justice. And that's something quite special. Now, as Dean of Physical Sciences, I get to meet a lot of really bright people on campus, and I get to be a supporter and find ways to help them enable their goals and their research. So one of these persons is Professor Alex Hall, who is member of the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Sciences. He is also a member of the Institute for the Environment and Sustainability, and he recently accepted to become the director of the 2050 Los Angeles Grand Challenge. So Alex is really been a visionary. He is a leader. He's very effective on what he does. He polarizes the vision and activity of many of us on campus. And this is so much so that, as you saw in the video, Chancellor Block is so much supportive of his vision, as is our Vice Chancellor for Research, Roger Wakimoto, who also played a role in the constitution of the California Wildfire Institute. So there is just no doubt in my mind that someone like Alex is really the right person to lead this effort. So of course, you're not going to be surprised when I say that in addition to the 3 titles that I already mentioned, he is the director of the California Wildfire Institute here at UCLA. And let's remember again that this is just the beginning. We're envisioning CWI at UCLA to be an initiative that engages the entire landscape of disciplines, because this wildfire crisis hits on every level. We see just as critical the need for colleagues in the humanities, in the social sciences, certainly in the life sciences, in the School of Law, the School of Public Health. So this is an enterprise that, if you think about it, we need the contribution of scholars and people that are experts in many, many different areas. And of course, environmental modeling. And that's something that our director, Alex Hall, is an expert of. And this is something that will germinate the growth of this institute. Now, I think we all appreciate the urgency of this effort, right? This is not something that we can wait. And that's, again, why we're reaching out to the community. And I have to tell you that the response has been spectacular up to now. So I want to thank to many, many people in the community, some of you sitting here today that have already invested in making the California Wildfire Institute at UCLA a reality. So I will have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Chief Kristin M. Crowley, the 19th Fire Chief of the Los Angeles Fire Department. Chief Crowley is a 22-year veteran of the LAFD and has proven her incredible leadership and character by promoting through the ranks. She served as a firefighter, paramedic, engineer, fire inspector, captain 1, captain 2, battalion chief, assistant chief, deputy chief, chief deputy, and now as fire chief. So we know that we have someone with extremely experience. Now, since March 2022, she has led a diverse department, about 3,400 sworn and more than 350 civilians, who basically they're here to protect 4 million people in Los Angeles, the nation's largest city, from the ocean to the mountains, the valley to the port of Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Fire Department responds to over 1,300 emergency calls every day. Please join me in welcoming Chair Crowley this evening to help us gain a perspective about the wildfire crisis in the context of Los Angeles.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. That was quite an intro. Thank you for that. My whole career flashed before me. That's amazing. Thank you. Well, it's such an honor to be here, and thank you for spending the evening with us. I was so honored for the invitation, and a picture says 1,000 words. We have seen this time and time again. I've seen this time and time again. And the amount of work and effort that you're all putting forward to bring solutions, I wrote that down, bring solutions, which is so true from our perspective. So today, I just want to give a unique perspective of what it is like to be a first responder, responding to these significant types of incidences. I'll start on a smaller, granular scale and kind of build it up from there. Now, when it comes to wildfires, our boots on the ground, rank and file firefighters, no matter what you throw at the LEFD, our members, we train for this, we prepare for this. Now, what has changed over my 23, 24-year career? When I look back into the late 90s, this is a different time. We used to have a wildfire or a brush season, as we call it. It was a season. 3-4 months or so, we'd get ready, we'd train, get our ambulances ready, our engines ready, our trucks ready. And here we are now talking about the same thing, and it's year-round. That is quite a pivot. And you ask me why. Well, I'm going to ask all of you why. If you're the experts, we know why. There has been a change. Now it's a matter of how do we create those solutions moving forward to get out ahead of this. From the fire department perspective, we often look at our preparedness piece. We look at it in segments where how to prepare the public for this type of an issue when it comes to wildfires. Preparedness for the fire department is an active outreach approach. I don't know if any of you live in the very high fire hazard severity zone within the city, within the state of California. The risk is there. So from the fire department perspective, we do start with ensuring that we prepare the public as much as possible. We lean forward. We come up with innovative different ways through public and private partnerships to ensure that the public's ready if and when we say ready, set, go. We need you to go. From an operational standpoint, if something does happen in the community and we need the community members to evacuate, it's not a matter of do I wait? We need everybody to go. So we're trying to educate people to make sure that you're ready so that a lot of people don't think when the fire engines are coming up and we have the community coming down off of access or egress issue, one way in, one way out. That's the things that keep me up at night, is to ensure that we keep the public safe. So with that, it's the preparedness piece with the community. The other piece that's really important, at least from the fire department perspective, and interesting enough from the city side, we have one of the most stringent brush clearance ordinances in the state. And again, if you live in the very high fire hazard severity zone, 200 feet of clearance, we make sure we have defensible space, which is essential when it comes to just boots on the ground and ensuring that we can protect life and property. That's our mission, protecting life and property. Defensible space will give us the time to get there, to prep, and then protect your home. So with that, now how do we build off of that? How do we lean forward organizationally? We train, we prepare the public, we get out there and make sure that everybody's ready to go. Now, how do we leverage the public private partnerships with exactly what you're doing here at UCLA as a force multiplier. I have so much respect for the scholars, for the individuals within the academia world where you're thinking, as you should, at an extremely highly elevated position to come up with realistic solutions that in the end will make the community safer and will absolutely help your firefighters be safer. So I applaud you for that. So thank you so much for coming together and supporting a program like this. Now it's a matter of, as I like to say quite often, it does take a village. It's going to take every single one of us, from your local firefighters to prepare all the way up and down the state to, again, our partnerships with what you can create in new and innovative ways to make us safer, more efficient, and to lean forward to ensure that we're protecting the environment and protecting life and property. So those are, again, I applaud each and every one of you for doing what you're doing. When I reflect back also over the last 24 years of where we used to have a fire season, like I said, it's year round. Just this past February, I don't know if you remember, just in Orange County, it was February. They had a major brush fire and lost multi-million-dollar homes. It wasn't wind driven. It was just a bunch of large properties with everything in alignment, and everything was gone within moments. And we all know what's at stake. And we also know if we don't do something collectively, that it's just going to get worse. So just want to, again, applaud you for what you're doing. Now, when I was doing a little bit of research, trying to think about what I wanted to talk about today, interesting enough, I don't know if you're aware of this, but again, I'm trying to look at it from the first responders' perspective, is 15 of the 20 largest fires in California history have occurred since 2000. That's astonishing. Think about that. These are the largest loss in life and largest property loss as well as Anchorage. So you look at that, 15 of the 20 largest fires that occurred in California history just in the past 23 years. That's pretty incredible. And we point to why. Again, I'm going to keep it very rudimentary, but you think about the why behind it. And again, as all of you may be experts in your field or however you want to contribute in this particular crisis, you think about most of the state's hottest and driest years have occurred during the last 2 decades. And then we ask ourselves, is it getting better or is it getting worse? And I see some eyebrows going up. Absolutely, it's getting worse, right? So again, we're not surprised by this. We're not surprised when we see these mega fires when everything's in alignment, and it's actually happening all throughout the year. So that's up to us to come together to ensure that we're working together, coming up with those innovative solutions, which I am positive as you move forward with the new program with Climate and Wildfire Institute. What an incredible concept. So just know that your fire department, your LEFD is here with you. We're alongside of you. We'll be behind you to push you along if you need us to. But again, I cannot wait to see what the Institute comes up with. We're always looking for innovative tools, whether it is something as simple as whatever you put your mind to. There's a lot of creative ideas out there that we're already utilizing, and we're just going to keep building off of those. But I know we're looking for new solutions in the future. So again, if you need anything from your LAFD, I'm really excited to see where we're going to be able to take this to make us safer, more efficient, and to protect property and lives. And I applaud you all for being here, and thank you so much for supporting this initiative. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Craer. I work at UCLA's Sustainable LA Grand Challenge, which was mentioned just a little bit ago. I'm going to be moderating a discussion with 2 really important people tonight. So I'd like to introduce Carolyn Godkin, who's the Executive Director of the Climate Wildfire Institute, and Professor Alex Hall will be joining me up here on stage, and we're going to not have a fireside chat, just a chat. but about this partnership between Climate Wildfire Institute, which is actually separate from UCLA, and what we're trying to do here with standing up the Climate Wildfire Institute at UCLA. So please join me in welcoming some of our guest speakers. You can just switch to the next slide. Thanks. Thanks, Sophie. So we will have a Q&A. And so hopefully you guys all have your cell phones. And if you have questions, please text them to this phone number up here, and then we'll have someone read them to us a little bit later. Okay. So I think to start off, it's good to know where the Climate and Wildfire Institute started. So we'll start with a little genesis story. And this might surprise you all, but I'm not going to ask Caroline to tell us the genesis story. I'm going to actually ask Dr. Hall to tell us the genesis story.
All right.
So,
thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, I want to take you all back to September 2020. This is the middle of the pandemic, and there were like 4 horsemen of the apocalypse running amok. One of those was the wildfires that we were having. We had several mega fires simultaneously here in California and also elsewhere in the Western U.S. And there really was an air of apocalypse around us. And I come from the field of climate science, and I've made a career of making predictions about climate. And I started thinking together with a few other colleagues about all the tools that we have to do environmental prediction, and how these really are not being leveraged to help us get ahead of this wildfire situation. And if you think about it, Chief Crowley mentioned some of the damage that we incur, but it's about $20 billion a year in costs. And of course, there's loss of life and property. We've been lucky in the past year. Despite the fire that Chief Crowley mentioned, we haven't had a terrible year in the past year or so, but we know that this era of megafire is here to stay. And we have a response to it, but it's very reactive. It's not at all proactive. And I began to get together with colleagues. This is a pandemic situation. We were over Zoom, and we met every Monday at lunch, and we started just thinking, what could we do to try to leverage some of the talents in the academy to address the wildfire challenge. And we began working with our government relations people on the various campuses, and especially here at UCLA. And we began approaching legislators, and we began incubating the idea of a Climate and Wildfire Institute. And the idea behind it is that we have enormous fragmentation in the wildfire space generally. On the decision-making and policy side, we have a very large constellation of federal, state, and local agencies that are responsible for managing wildlands and also responsible for firefighting. We have the insurance industry, we have the timber industry, we have land use planning functions in municipalities. They're all relevant to the wildfire question, and they're all almost totally uncoordinated. And so the idea behind the Climate and Wildfire Institute is to create coordination among all these external stakeholders. And we ended up getting $7 million in funding from the state of California to set this up. And about a year or so ago, we finally got the money. and then has it been maybe about a year or so? We hired this amazing woman, Caroline Godkin, to be our executive director. So that's, in essence, how we came about. Yeah.
thanks, Alex. I've personally been really inspired by your story as someone who's excellent in your field, and how your passion has really pivoted you towards wanting the work that's being done here, not just at UCLA, but across the entire academic community, to be societally impactful and in a really nimble and accelerated way. So,
and just to add on that real quickly, I think one of the things that was really great about working with my colleagues is that we all had this sense of selfless collaboration, and there was no, benefit for any of us really, except that we really were, like everyone, freaked out, to for lack of a better word, about what was happening. And we knew we could do better than this. And so we all pitched in to set up this organization. And that's kind of in the DNA of this whole enterprise, is that we have to be working together, and we have to work together selflessly, because that's the only way it'll get done. And we really are in, a very difficult situation where we have mismanagement of wildlands in the past is making wildfire worse, and we're in a changing climate. And so how do we deal with this?
And that brings us to the first time I met Caroline, which was lovely. That was at the launch of the CWI, the Climate Wildfire Institute, which took place here almost a year ago officially, at UCLA. And that was just an amazing experience. And I just want to maybe start us off by having Caroline tell us a little bit about what CWI's charge is, how you came into this role, because of everything I've learned about you, you're just such a great fit. And let's also talk about what the role of UCLA is in relationship to it. Alex mentioned selfless collaboration, and I just want to say that was probably my biggest takeaway of getting to know some of the people that came to that meeting. So selfless collaboration really has been something eminent in I feel like the wildfire community, even if people are working as separate actors, there was such a thirst for that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's a real honor. So I chose to join CWI after about 14 years working on state and federal policy related to wildfire and climate change. And I really witnessed kind of firsthand the impacts that we were experiencing as a state. And Chief Crowley, you mentioned the term megafire, which was not in our lexicon probably 10 or 15 years ago. And I saw that in the rim fire outside of Yosemite. And I also worked on the state's debris missions. So the missions to help individuals, Californians, recover from these terrible things. The towns of Paradise, the towns of Greenville, all places that we never knew of before, but we know about because of the terrible tragedies. And I was just absolutely thrilled to be offered the opportunity to work with these amazing humans. And I really want to reflect on a couple of things you mentioned, Alex. When the skies turned orange in 2020, working in climate was really difficult. And it was very difficult to find hope. It truly felt like there was no possible way to find hope. And I met these humans who took that feeling and created a path for solutions and came together. And every single one of the people that created CWI did not need to do this. They are all world leaders in their own fields. They did not need another day job on top of the ones that they already had. But what they said was, CWI is hope. Action is hope, because we can do better, we can apply our brilliance, and we can do better, and we can show hope in the face of the apocalyptic orange skies. And they had a vision of harnessing the power of the academy, but bringing alongside it the power of convening and bringing the community together. And I always like to refer to it as acting without ego. So realizing that there is so much to do, that we have to do this in the most effective way. And we have to do this without ego, and we have to come to it with a collaborative spirit. So that initial $7 million of investment from the state really got CWI off and running. And, as I think about it, and I think about this crisis really requires us, it demands us to accelerate solutions. And when I talk about that, it's getting the best possible science into the hands of our policymakers. So be that folks who work at our state agencies, our legislators, anybody that's crafting policy, but also into the hands of practitioners like Chief Crowley and the 3,500 humans that you lead. How do we get absolute best science to them? But also, how do we leverage the experience to actually say, what are the questions we need to be asking? What should we be asking of UCLA to bring to bear? And it's the complexity of this problem. If it was easy, we would have fixed it by now. I mean, honestly, it is a complex ecosystem problem. It's a complex climate problem. It's a complex human problem. And we have to iterate these questions around together and to get to, ultimately, getting solutions into the hands of every single human that's working to address this. And as I see it, as we are building CWI, our success is going to be based in having a trusted partner, in having a place that we can iterate around, so we don't have to start over. We don't have time to start over fresh every time that we're asking a question, that we're building a research, that we need a trusted partner.
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's underestimated that there's lots of experts out there, and the tax, the toll, the transaction cost there is for someone like you who's already doing so much work to bring together, as Alex said, like these disparate groups. That in itself is a tremendous action of coordination. And so if I understand correctly, it sounds like you're asking of UCLA to kind of be that aggregator and that coordinator of the academic community to really have a place for that discussion and that knowledge sharing.
And the partner to grow together.
Well said, yeah. Well, I would say we're on board for a selfless collaboration partnership. That sounds really cool. But so maybe we can make this a little more tangible and talk about some of the activities that CWI is working on. Maybe there's one in particular that you can draw on that we can kind of show the work you're doing and where we would see CWI at UCLA, the academic community plugging into that.
Absolutely. I have to say we've had a very busy first year, as I'm sure, Alex, you can attest. And we're doing a lot of work supporting the Governor's Forest Management Task Force and building some real tangible tools there. We're working on a project linking how to bring Indigenous knowledge and combine it with Western science into land management. I'm really excited about that. But we're really thinking about building communities across disciplines and across different questions. And the example I want to talk about is around prescribed fire. So, the application of fire to reintroducing fire into landscapes where, for many historical reasons, it has been excluded. A lot of our work is touching on that right now. From everything from we are sponsoring, it's going to be about a 3,500 acre burn in the Southern Sierras, to working on some convenings around actually talking about who is prescribed fire effective for, and how are we looking and how are we measuring our effectiveness. And I'd say that what we're doing is, and I call it the secret sauce, which is possibly not the most technical phrase to use, is that drawing the connections and drawing the through lines between these different pieces of work, bringing stakeholders together to ask, what are the barriers? And we will not have done our work if we just identify the barriers. The critical thing is so how do we address that? So as we have a hotter and drier climate, the number of burn days, which is literally the number of days when you can put fire on the ground, is going to be reduced, which is going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy that if you cannot put fire on the ground, the fewer days are all on it. So how do we address that? And how do we get to protecting communities from smoke, vulnerable communities from smoke? So all of those key thoughts that we need to draw out and that we need to address so that we can give to policymakers thinking about prescribed fire some of the answers and how to address those issues.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier this iterative process, and I can see how that is just, identifying barriers and bouncing that to the academic community and realizing what's feasible, what's not feasible, and just growing together, really collaborating on that. But Alex, you mentioned prescribed burns. So I'm interested to hear what's going through your mind, as she's talking about prescribed burns. Where do you see UCLA or the academic community being responsive here?
Well, Caroline nicely teed up, a barrier to prescribed fire, which is that in a changing climate, there are fewer days when we can do prescribed burns. There are many other barriers. There is a basic question about the effectiveness of prescribed burn, and that's going to depend on the landscapes where they occur. Actually, in Southern California, they're not. That's really not the way to manage fires because we have a chaparral environment here. But in forested landscapes, and in many forested landscapes, they are going to be effective. We have small examples of experiments where there have been prescribed burns and they have somewhat mitigated wildfire severity. What we don't know is when we do this at scale and we actually account for the costs of doing it at scale, what will be the impact on wildfire risk? And obviously we can't answer that question without actually doing it if we don't have some kind of a way to model these ecosystems and the climate. So if we have a way to simulate the climate and climate change and the way that ecosystems actually operate. And we can, in the model, we can introduce prescribed fire. We can actually look at how that affects wildfire risk, and we can answer questions about how effective it would be and where it would be effective. So if we're talking about trying to invest resources, scarce resources, at a time when we can actually invest them, it really helps to have a simulation system. So one of the elements of CWI at UCLA is a modeling and a prediction system for climate and wildfire that includes things like models of the atmosphere, the climate, the hydrology, ecosystems, wildfire behavior, air quality, also so that we can understand the air quality impacts of both prescribed burns and megafires and understand the trade-offs between those in terms of air quality. So we can really be quantitative and provide quantitative decision support for the community that Caroline is responsible for organizing, the decision-making community. So that's an example of where the academic community, with some investment and development, I think can build tools that are actually quite useful that don't yet exist, but that can help us inform decisions. And these are multi-billion-dollar decisions. These are not small decisions. And we have scarce resources, so we want to invest them wisely. And so we want to do this in a way that's informed by the best science that we have.
So it sounds like this is something that will help us predict vulnerability and risk, but also possible outcomes on how we can invest resources into certain things preventatively and preparedness.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine a system being used for other applications. There's the seasonal timescale of prediction, which that kind of timescale of prediction beyond the weather forecasting timescale, which we're not so great at. Is there latent skill in predicting wildfire risk at that timescale? That would be hugely useful, obviously, for the firefighting community, for planning. One of the biggest challenges when we have megafires burning everywhere for the firefighting community, because we have to deploy very scarce resources. So if we understand those risks in advance, then we can do a better job planning. That's another kind of application of a system like that. And I could probably go on, but you probably want me to stop.
I do want to ask you maybe a slightly technical question. I hear so much people in modeling talking about at scale, and that has come up a number of times in these conversations. And so could you just maybe tell us very briefly, the importance of scale, especially when we're talking about trying to come up with strategies or predictions of, say, Northern California that's predominantly forest versus Southern California? Why is scale important? I mean, we think of scale, I think go bigger, but when we think of scale, I think in terms of modeling, there's something more important to think about with the difference, right, of being able to tell more granular scale, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways to think about it. One is that we have really diverse landscapes here, and they have different dynamics. And so what we need tools that actually simulate and predict the unique dynamics of this very diverse range of ecosystems. And as we know, these ecosystems exist because of the very complicated topography of the state. So you have to model all those things to really capture those dynamics. And then there's the question of, we are managing this as a whole. So how do we scale up from interventions that happen at this local scale to something that has an impact at the state level or beyond? So I think it kind of goes both ways. We need to model and understand at this very, very micro scale or the landscape scale. And then we need to understand how to aggregate decision-making so that we're investing resources widely at the statewide scale or maybe even beyond. I don't know if that addresses what you were talking about.
Yeah, it clarifies my question, just because, again, I think that like you're saying, that it goes both directions is helpful for me tracking along with it. I also heard you mention hydrology and a lot of the other parts of this that you would draw in for modeling for something like this. And it makes me really think of, number one, the question I feel like I hear a lot of people asking is, well, we've had a really wet season, so does that mean that we're in good? We don't have to worry about wildfires? It sounds like these are just things that we may already kind of know, but that also just sounds like what you're talking about is remarkable and goes well beyond wildfire and the wildfire crisis, which am I following along with you on that?
Yeah, I mean, there's, if you just take the example of water resources and wildfire, these are interlocking problems. They're very related to one another. The one that you mentioned, we had a very wet year, and that has had the effect of mostly suppressing a lot of wildfire. On the other hand, there's a buildup of fuels in the chaparral and in the forests because of all the growth of vegetation. So probably, if we have a dry year after this, that's going to set us up for probably, and again, this is landscape dependent to an extent we don't really know, but probably that's going to set us up for greater risk down the road. So there's this interplay between the abundance of resources we're getting now in terms of water and then the inevitable scarcity when drought returns, which it always does in California, and then the uptick in wildfire risk. So you can imagine that a system that's used to predict, say, wildfire risk would also be very useful for predicting water resources because they're so related to one another. And likewise for air quality and other environmental challenges that are so critical here in California. So this is a way to invest in an environmental modeling system that actually has other applications beyond wildfire. And that's why we're the Climate and Wildfire Institute. We're not just wildfire. There's the whole issue of climate and climate change that's linked with wildfire and all these other environmental challenges that we have.
Caroline, I see you nodding over there. Is there any thoughts sparking up about some of the things you shared about going beyond wildfire and the climate generally?
Well, and yes, absolutely. And I think in part because this is such a multifaceted issue. Particularly I was thinking of Chief Crowley when you were talking about asking, for preparedness. How do we shift human behavior? How do we, and that goes well beyond wildfire, by goodness, as we've experienced in the last 3 years. How do we shift human behavior? And to me, the immediacy at our charge at hand is climate and wildfire. But we can build a model, both an actual model, but also almost an intellectual model of how you respond to what a community needs, what the policymakers and the practitioners need, and then leverage the brilliance of the academy to actually come to a model of this is actually how we do things faster and better. So the modeling is really important. I think it can start to help us predict a lot. But you mentioned changing behavior. So Alex, as somebody who, as the founding director for Climate and Wildfire at UCLA and having to really aggregate the research community, are there other types of inquiry or ways of knowing that you think are needed to start to complement the models to really see an optimal impact here?
Yeah, I come from the natural sciences, and that's where I start in all of the things that I think about. But it's very clear that we have to engage not only the actual policy-making community, but the policy research community, and where UCLA has big strengths to understand how we might implement various decisions that need to be made. And so I think the social sciences have a huge role here. I also think that, it's funny, once you start asking these questions about managing landscapes, which we have to do, we're in the face of climate change, we have to dramatically rethink the way that we manage these wildlands. But then you come up very quickly against questions about, well, what are we trying to manage towards? What does success look like? What do these places look like that are so precious, like Yosemite, in a changed climate where megafire risk is managed? And that's not the question. That's not really a scientific question. That's kind of a values question. What type of wild places do we want to protect? And I think that's where we get into questions that the humanities can help us to think through and address, and the arts. So I think it goes well beyond the scientific community into the policy community into the humanities and beyond. So I think it's really multifaceted, and I think that the academy has many voices, and there are many people that can bring a lot to this conversation at UCLA and beyond.
And just to clarify, since you just mentioned UCLA and beyond, when we're talking about aggregating the research community, that goes beyond UCLA? Yeah,
I think often in these types of initiatives, we emphasize UCLA and what UCLA can do, and there is a lot that UCLA can do, and UCLA has amazing strengths. But in the spirit of kind of selfless and goals-oriented collaboration, we have to bring in the expertise where it is. And so sometimes that means reaching out to people at other institutions. If the world expert in such a thing is someplace else, then UCLA becomes the nexus for collaboration with those people. It's not necessarily happening here at UCLA. So what we're trying to do here is build UCLA as the hub and organizer for this very sprawling academic community that does things related to wildfire, so that Caroline doesn't have to be driven crazy figuring out who to call to get this certain question answered, or who the best person is to do this kind of work. She has a partner that she can work with to help her navigate this very complicated academic community. So yeah, it goes beyond UCLA, but I think UCLA can benefit tremendously by being the organizing hub.
Everybody loves to come to convenings in LA, so we do have that going for us.
Yeah, you do.
So Caroline, how does that sound for a brain trust?
It sounds pretty amazing. And particularly, we can't have business as usual. And the innovative nature of this and bringing in the other disciplines is just so exciting. 95% of wildland fires are human caused. And so there's something in there and the things that we need to get to. So it's just fantastically exciting.
Where do you see this partnership going in 5 years, Caroline?
Oh, that's a great question. I would really love. Chief Crowley, you came tonight. Chief Crowley in 2 years calls up and has a question about the WUI particular to LA County and an interaction you're seeing and how do we get to that? And that we organize around it. And then we have somebody here at UCLA who is working with Chief Crowley's team, iterating around that in short order to come to a practical solution. Either we change policy, we invest in a different way, we look at something different. So an actual practitioner has a solution and they have a way to connect to this community.
I think we should move to Q&A. I want to thank you guys all for hanging in there with us. I know we got off to a little bit of a late start. Any final comments from you while Sophie gets set up for Q&A?
No, I would just reiterate that, I think if you think about, success in say 2 to 5 years, for me, it would be having our workforce and educational training programs in place that we have envisioned for CWI at UCLA. The idea there is to connect our students and postdocs with the decision-making communities, and so that they do their academic research in the context that's relevant for policy making, that we have our modeling and prediction system in place, and that we've also begun to build the tools to make that information usable, which is not a small task, by the way. I mean, I think the dream of someone being able to kind of pick up the phone or maybe go to a website and having information that's useful to them at their hands, that's actually hard to do. It's not just building the modeling tools, it's building the interfaces, it's building the connection points, creating the information handoffs. I think those are great. Those would be, I would be thrilled if those things could be in place.
Thank you guys both for sharing what you have so far. And I just want to, from my perspective of working in the university for over a decade on this, on societally impactful research and trying to motivate through programs and curriculum and working with external stakeholders, what I just want to underscore the challenge that you're signing on for here, Alex, with so often you hear people say, we're going to do a wildfire institute. And so they just have graduate students that work on wildfire and faculty that work on wildfire. But to actually build inertia and have everybody working towards solutions that are defined by the needs of the people who are frontline defenders or people who are trying to make choices about their homes, or all of these different parts it's really, really ambitious and exciting and remarkable. So thank you guys both for sharing all about that. But I'm sure we have some questions, I hope.
Yes, no, there's quite a few questions. So I think I'm going to start off by asking a question for Alex that really touches on the modeling. We got a lot of questions that really wanted you to get into the weeds about, what kind of data sets that you're working on, but also, how this integrates things beyond just climate science and thinking about specifically air quality and wildfire and how that intersects with the state's goal to reduce GHG emissions. And so I think the audience would like to know a little bit more about what goes into this data sets and what kind of questions you can answer with that.
Yeah, there are There's the components that I work with in my own research, which is the climate modeling part of it, and those are models of the atmosphere, sometimes the ocean. Within an atmospheric model, you can also embed an air transport model, and also an atmospheric chemistry model, and that allows you to model smoke and emissions as they travel within the climate and weather simulations. Those pieces are largely in place, but they have to be developed for this particular application in this particular place. There are other pieces that have to be developed much more thoroughly. There's models of ecosystems, like we mentioned the forest and chaparral, but there are subdivisions within those that have to be modeled explicitly. There's wildfire behavior models. All the people who work with wildfire behavior models have said that the megafires that we've seen are not obeying the rules that are in these models, and so they have to be kind of revamped so that they work in this changing climate. Those are some examples of build-outs that we need to do in order to have a working prediction system. I think I touched on some of those points. I don't know if you want to remind me if there are others that I've missed there.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really great answer. And I think it also sort of goes to, what Carolyn was talking about and bringing in stakeholders and policy. And maybe she can tell us a little bit more about what the role of CWI will be to shape policy. And I got a lot of questions about the roles of utilities, for example, or land use policy or things like that. So if you could talk a little bit about how you're going to bridge the gap between research and action on the ground.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think Jennifer mentioned at the start, we had our inaugural convening here at UCLA almost a year ago, unbelievably. And from that, we had a lot of different people represented. So we had state and federal legislative staff. We had practitioners on the ground. We had folks from the from the UC Extension. And we really brought them together to ask them the questions of like, how can we help you? Where should we be focusing our time? And now, having done that, what we're doing is we're really looking at the types of projects that can really get to the key questions that we want to answer. So, again, to my prescribed fire example, it's top of mind. Bringing together, we have, for example, a partnership between some Indigenous leaders, and we are creating recommendations to make to the Federal Timber Caucus as they consider changes to federal fire policy. So that would be one way that we're thinking about in influencing policy. The other part is actually bringing together a community around how can we facilitate getting more prescribed fire on the ground. And that's from the people who were literally going to be holding a drip torch all the way to the people that are writing the budget and thinking about what does liability insurance mean for the human that is holding the drip torch. So really bringing across every kind of layer of practitioner and policymaker, but convening, it's that critical word that we have, is convening, bringing them together in a space that it isn't agenda-driven, that is without ego, to actually ask them the real and meaningful questions. Did I hit all your points, Sophie?
Yes, I think so. And it actually touches on another question that we got, which I think is hinting at the recent X Prize announcement, but really is asking how non-governmental organizations and other institutions can get involved with CWI and CWI at UCLA specifically.
Yeah, no, I think the principle from the very start has been one of inclusion, and I think the primary goal is to overcome the fragmentation in this space on both the stakeholder side or the decision maker side and on the academic side. And so to the extent that people are interested in this space and have something relevant to contribute and are interested parties, then we want to engage. I think that's the overall overriding principle. So I think we're having a convening. The CWI, not at UCLA. The CWI is having a convening in the fall, right?
In the fall, yeah.
On prescribed fire, on this topic of prescribed fire, and so that's an opportunity for people anyone is welcome to come and join the conversation about this topic.
And to build on that, we talk about an open consortium model, so really looking for any partners where we can work together, where we can amplify each other. But also we're thinking broadly about how to reach early career folks, how to showcase their work. We have a CWI fellow this year, so we're going to look to build a fellowship program to really bring on the next generation who are going to be working in this space and to hear from them and to build out that pipeline as well.
And Alex, I feel like there's some vision that you have as far as similarly. I mean, for CWI at UCLA, you would also have postdocs and graduate student positions and opportunities for people to engage through those sorts of, like, sounding similar, but they're different, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there has to be some permanent staff professionals who are developing and maintaining a modeling system is a lot of work, and then also postdocs and graduate students who could come from anywhere in the university doing something relevant to the Climate and Wildfire Institute's needs, and that's a really key thing. We're open to everyone, but the one criterion is that it has to be of relevance to the wildfire challenge. And the idea is to create a collaborative culture that involves both the professional staff and also the students and the postdocs as well, so that we're getting, and also CWI staff, so that we're getting the students exposed to professionals in the environmental modeling and prediction space, and also in the policy and decision-making space. And so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel for the future, right? We have people who are already trained in this kind of collaboration, which we don't really currently have.
Yeah, so it sounds like there'll be some complementary training of future workforce and selfless collaborators.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question about the modeling that really goes to sort of understanding how, go from something abstract like modeling to really on-the-ground questions. And could you tell us a little bit more about the kinds of questions that modeling can answer now, as opposed to the kinds of questions you're hoping to be able to answer in the future with this additional capacity? For example, where we should allow building, or, can you identify the highest risk areas and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there are questions that we can address now. We know that you're not going to like this, but we know that there's a sensitivity of wildfire size and intensity to temperature. This is work that is done in part by Park Williams here at UCLA. That's been observed, and that's one of the reasons why we have seen the biggest fires in the past 20 years or so being in recent times, because we've observed a warming. We know that's human caused, and we know that will continue under a changing climate. So we have projections of future climate. We have projections of changes in temperature, and we can use those sensitivities to infer what the what pace wildfires will continue to increase in size. That's the type of thing we can answer now. So that's like the scary thing that should motivate us to build the infrastructure to address the more difficult questions, which are what should we do to mitigate that risk? And that's the thing that we can't do right now. So we know a lot already about climate change and wildfire. We just need to know a lot more so that we get out of the situation where we're just reacting and spending money to protect people and property, that we're actually investing money to be proactive, that we're planning ahead.
Yeah, I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Yep, right on the same page.
And I think you've teed it up really well. We got a lot of questions about specific materials or specific technological interventions, which really goes to sort of this mitigation question. And can you tell us a little bit more about how CWI, UCLA, and CWI as a whole is going to sort of bring the findings and new technologies and discoveries from research to into the hands of practitioners, into the market?
Well, to go back to the prescribed fire example, I think it would be really useful to, if we establish a planning time horizon like 2050, it'd be really useful to know if we did prescribe burning at scale in the places where we think it's effective, How much will that mitigate wildfire risk given the temperature increase that will have happened by then? And then I think policy researchers could get involved too. How much is that going to cost, and who's going to do it? And what would be the funding mechanisms? Then I think you can come up with a menu of options. If maybe there are certain parts of the state where this is much more beneficial and where it's cheaper. So maybe if you have X amount of money, you invest your resources there. You could give policymakers in the policy community a menu of options to understand how to spend their money, because we know wildfire is not the only way the state spends money, right? So it's competing against other priorities. So if you're the person making those decisions, you have to understand, what's the extra benefit I get from this extra increment of money? Those are the kinds of questions that we can tee up for the decision-making community. And I think that those are the things, that's the kind of information we would convey to Caroline and her staff, and they then could interact with the policy-making community to make decisions and make recommendations. That's how I would see it playing out.
I think for me, it's yes and to that, and also the creating the space. It's the creating the space for policymakers and practitioners everybody has their head down doing their job on a daily basis, bringing people up into a convening space. And that was some of the magic that we created last year with the support of UCLA, that it's bringing the space where people can connect the dots and helping people and helping facilitate the connection of the dots between all of the work that is being done, that can be done, and that we can help facilitate.
Well, thank you guys both for telling us about both of these really exciting organizations and helping us to start to see how they're different, but very complementary and very much needed. I'll just end with one final question. From either one of your perspectives, does a partnership like this exist that functions well outside of what you're trying to do here?
I think every environmental challenge deserves this kind of treatment. Wildfire is not the only crisis in the environment. And so this kind of deep thought and this kind of institution building is required for many environmental challenges. And one thing that's exciting to me is that we're creating a kind of a template or a recipe for other types of environmental challenges. So I don't think that this kind of thing does exist. This is a novel framework. The closest analog might be in the realms of public health and medicine, where you have public health entities like the CDC who are responsible for decision-making in controlling disease, who are also getting research and information from the medical sciences community and interacting. And I think in that space, there's something like this going on. And there's organization there, but in the environmental space, I don't think this does exist.
And I'll add 14 years of experience as a policymaker and would say that I didn't have this place to go to. And so that's what I want to build.
Well, it's exciting to be part of it. Thank you guys again. And thank you all for being part of it, for being here as we're just talking about this new initiative that we're launching. Really, really great to see you all here, and hope to see you at future events as this starts to develop. And I'm so sorry, we're just going to hear really quick closing remarks from Marilyn Raphael, who is the director of the Institute of Environment and Sustainability.
Good evening, everyone. What a wonderful discussion and all of that information. Thank you, Jennifer, Caroline, and Alex. We are really fortunate to have participated in it. They've made quite clear that addressing the wildfire challenge will be complicated. It will require innovation in environmental modeling, in policy, in a range of sciences, and the humanities. The challenge can only be met successfully by an interdisciplinary approach. The breadth and depth of interdisciplinary research across all of UCLA is significant. It spans a range of scientific and policy areas. UCLA's world-leading faculty, postdocs, and graduate students have a long history of working collaboratively on research projects within and beyond the institute, or beyond the university, sorry. Here, the IUES can help. We are an interdisciplinary institute with faculty appointments from across campus, which means we have the experience and the expertise to tackle these environmental issues from many angles. We are aware, as I've said, that we're not just doing research for the moment, we are doing research for the future. We understand that what we have here with the CWI is a unique opportunity to leverage UCLA's education programs, to train the next generation of leaders, to transform what Alex has so aptly called our broken relationship with wildfire. Working with our students is an enduring source of hope, personally for me, and for our future in general. Alex Hall is the right person for the job. I've worked with him as director of the IUES, and I know his scientific work very well. He has signed himself up for an ambitious job. I have full confidence in his vision. I invite you all to join us as we work here. Thank you.